Now, can you hear me, everyone who's here?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Right off. Then we'll get started off. We were talking about the evolution of the parliament as an institution. And I'm saying that we are talking about evolution we talked about the Magna Carta, right? I told you that the parliament started as a feudal body, and after having started as a feudal body, okay. So as I was saying, sorry about these. Pranita P vanished somewhere, so I had to search her out. The parliament began its existence in 1066 AD as an institution which was meant to talk with the king. I told you, parler in French means to talk, and parliament was the institution created by the feudal lords. Created by the feudal lords, and these feudal lords basically were the ones who were looking at trying to talk to the king about matters pertaining to taxation, because I'm not going to go into the whole theory. I'm just going to only say, because it was an agrarian artisan economy, and in an agrarian and artisan economy, the income of people is not something which is always the same. For instance, you take me. Every month, I get the same salary. Every month, I get the same salary. Every year, I get increments and I get the same salary again for one more year. Suddenly, somebody doesn't say, look, you've been getting so much salary so far. Now, suddenly, we are going to cut down your salary. They don't say that. But in an agrarian economy, where most of the time you are dependent on the vagaries of nature, which means, which basically means that you could be, you know, it essentially means that you could be getting good rains one year. And if you get good rains, then you get good crops. If you get good crops, then your income is higher. But if the vagaries of nature are against you, if there is no rain, if there is famine, F-A-M-I-N-E, if there is famine, there is no rain, then your income is not as good as it was in the past. So the taxation system had to take into consideration all these things. That there are times when you can tax people higher, when the rains were good, when the crops were good, when they were not destroyed. Sometimes we have the opposite of the famine. If it rains at the wrong time, then it ruins the crop, which means that, again, whatever you have done has gone waste. So untimely rains are those which go against the farmer or the peasant. So he won't be able to pay the tax that you want him to pay. But the kings had got used to a certain kind of life. They were spending money for various reasons. They went to fight other kings. And please remember, when you go to war, you require money. So if at the wrong time some other king invaded you, then if you had to go to war, you needed money, then you would say, pay the tax. You have to pay the tax. So these things can happen. And feudalism, which is the way of life in the medieval period, we are now talking about the medieval period of Europe. The parliament came into being in the medieval period. The parliament came into being in the medieval period, and what does that mean? It means that we are looking at the feudal period, because there is a coincidence of the medieval period and the feudal period. So, like I said, the economy is something which is dependent upon agriculture. And if it is dependent upon agriculture, then you're looking at a situation where taxes cannot always be the same. You're looking at a situation where taxes cannot always be the same. So then what do you do? That is the question. So then what do you do? You will go and say, the king will say, I don't know how you will do it. He'll tell the feudal lords, I don't know what you're going to do, but I need this much money and you're going to get it for me. So this was something that put great pressure on the feudal lords. And the feudal lords wanted an audience with the king. They wanted to tell him their side of the story. They wanted to tell him that, you know, we are having our own difficulties because the peasants, who are the ones who pay taxes to us, the feudal lords gave taxes to the king, part of the taxes to the king, right? And so when this whole thing became, what should I say? When this whole thing became an issue between the king and the feudal lords tried to talk to the king, who refused to talk. So these people formed a group. This is what students do, isn't it? If one student goes and talks to the principal and says, look, this is the difficulty we are having, please do something about it, the principal probably will not listen to you at all. In which case, what do? You create a group of people. Well, it is not there in your college, in women's college, it's not a very big thing, but if you go to the campus, you have these big student unions. You have these big student unions, ABVP, SFI, PDSU. So the other day, because the vice chancellor decided to increase the mess fees, increase the room rent for hostelers, the general fees for people, what did they do? They basically formed into big groups, because these days, this vice chancellor who's there in the university, he has deployed a number of security people. There are 8 or 10 security people near the vice chancellor. So if there are so many people there, then more people had to go. So the students went in hundreds. Once they go in hundreds, what will 10 people do? 10 people cannot stop. So they went right in, barged into the vice chancellor's room, and they made their demands. But this situation is slightly different between the feudal lords and the king, because everybody had their castles. If you close the door of the castles, you couldn't enter that particular thing. And what the king used to do, the king never went and asked the feudal lords about tax collections. He would send an emissary, EMISSARY. He would send an emissary, and the emissary is the person who basically does the job of telling the feudal lords that you need to pay this much tax. So the feudal lords go to the peasants, they go to the artisans, and say, please pay tax, pay more money. Now, when their arms are twisted, people have some savings. So maybe for 1 year, 2 years, they'll pay taxes, high taxes, even though their incomes are low. But after that, it doesn't work, right? When you run out of savings, 1 year, 2 years, I'll draw from my savings and pay these exorbitant taxes. But after that, if I'm not able to pay the taxes, then the problem is these people, the feudal lords, had to pay from their pockets to the king, which they didn't want to do. What they wanted to do was to have a dialogue with the king. They wanted to have a dialogue with the king and tell him the difficulties of taxation and tell him that you cannot demand money from us in this particular manner. You cannot demand money from us. So you will have to give leeway. You'll have to give a leeway so that what will happen is that sometimes taxes can be lowered. Sometimes when nature is kind, then they can pay more. So that is as far as the peasant is concerned. So this is what the feudal lords were trying to tell the king, that we can't go on paying taxes at the rate at which you want us to pay taxes. The story of the artisans is another one. It's another story. The story of the artisans is that they are dependent on the produce. Please don't think I am mispronouncing this word. There is a difference between saying produce and produce. Okay. If you're producing something, if you're, say, let us say a company that makes sewing machines, then they are producing sewing machines. But produce is the entire amount of crops, food related crops. These coming together is called produce, not produce. So if the produce is fine, then the artisan also survived. Otherwise, the artisan didn't survive. Just imagine if the peasant is under complete control. If the peasant is under complete control of the lord, feudal lord, and come what may, if he has to pay a certain amount of money, then the peasant will, like I said, dip into his savings and pay the tax. But what happens with this? But what happens with this is that you will find that people are having a problem because now they can't buy other things they want. Suppose they want to buy a gold chain or something to do with gold, a gold ring, a gold chain, a bangle, any of these things, if they want to buy, if they go to the, what should I say, if they go to the artisan, they have to pay money. They have to pay money for the gold, they have to pay money for the work done by the artisan. Artisans, I told you, are goldsmiths, blacksmiths, carpenters, potters. All these people are artisans. Feudal economies are not only agrarian economies, they are also artisan economies. The artisan part is secondary. The primary part is agrarian. Now, if people don't have money, if they don't have money, then the problem is, if they don't have money, the problem is that you will, sorry, like I told you, my throat is in a very bad shape today. If the peasant doesn't have money, he won't go to the artisan. He won't buy things. And if he doesn't buy things, then where does the artisan get his money? And the artisan also, by the way, has to pay a tax. So not only is he not getting money, he also has to think of how to pay the tax. So this is the problem with the feudal economy. Please remember this. This is very important. Feudal economy has these two agrarian and artisan components. The artisan economy is dependent upon the agrarian economy. So the artisans don't have money. They become poor. Then what? The question that comes up is, how do we squeeze money out of people who don't have any money? Suppose you don't have money and somebody comes and says, if you don't give me money, I'm going to beat you. I'm going to thrash you. If I don't have money, I'll get thrashed. but I can't pay money. That's how it is. So the feudal lords felt that there should be a policy of taxation which takes into consideration the vagaries of nature, which takes into consideration the difficulties faced by the peasants, the artisans, and themselves, because they are also taxpayers. They wanted to talk to the king, the king wouldn't listen. So in 1066 CE, they formed the parliament, but it took nearly 2 centuries for the king to finally speak to them. In 1215 CE, Common Era, not AD, people don't use AD anymore, it is CE. So in 1215 CE, the king agreed to talk to the feudal lords. So the feudal lords went with a charter of demands regarding taxation. And this charter of demands was a mega charter. It wasn't a small charter. And therefore, it got the Latin name Magna Carta, Magnacarta, Magna Carta, mega charter. This was presented to the king by the feudal lords. Finally, they came face to face. No emissaries in the middle. They came face to face and said, listen, in the process of taxation, you should give us also a say. You should give us also a say so that we will be able to pay taxes properly ourselves, and we will be able to collect money from the artisans and the peasants. So you have to involve us meaning the feudal lords. You have to involve us in the process of taxation. Decisions taken regarding taxation should not be unilaterally done by the king. They should not be done unilaterally done by the king. They have to be done in consultation with the feudal lords. And like I told you the other day, there are 2 kinds of feudal lords. One who are called the peers, Peers, peers. If the peers are there, then there was another category of people who were called the knights, Knights. The peers, the feudal lords who were peers, were born into a family of a duke, of an earl, of a lord, any one of these. So if he was born into the family of a duke, he became a duke. So the peers claim that they had blue blood, as opposed to other people having a red blood. The peers said, we are like royalty. We are blue-blooded. The king also claimed that he was blue-blooded. Now, the second kind of feudal lords were the knights, I told you. I also told you what is knighting. A knight is made when somebody shows his bravery, when somebody shows courage, and in doing so, he establishes that he is of use to the king. Okay? He establishes that he is of use to the king. And therefore, the king will make a feudal lord out of him. I told you the ceremony. The person who's being knighted will go in front of the king. He'll go down on his right knee and the king will take a sword. I told you the other day, the pronunciation is oh, that's okay. Don't worry. That's okay. Don't worry about those things. So the king places a sword. We say sword because our languages have more complicated sounds. Our languages really have more complicated sounds. For example, one of the names of Vishnu is Ojas Tejo Dhyutidhara. Ask an Englishman to say this. Ojas Tejo Dhyutidhara. They won't be able to say it. So, even though they wrote S-W-O-R-D, they pronounced it as S-O-R-D, sword. So the sword was placed on the left shoulder and the king would say, you are now a knight. And depending on what that person's name is, he says, let's say that person's name is, what is a good medieval sounding name? I can't think of it. So he'll say, he'll put that sword on his left shoulder and say, Sir Richard, rise. When he says that, then this man gets up and he is now a feudal lord. So there are two kinds of feudal lords. One who are born as feudal lords. These people are called peers, Peers, peers. And then there are these people who have proved themselves to be of value, who have proved themselves to be of value to the king. And so the king basically said, I'm making a feudal lord out of you. So he knighted somebody. I told you the other day, if you look at the pieces that you find on a chessboard, you have a knight, which is a horse. People think a horse is a knight. No, the horse is not the knight. The person who rides the horse and fights a battle with a sword is the knight. But in chess, you take the horse and say, this is the knight. Similarly, you have the rook, which some people call elephant. A rook is another designation given to a feudal lord. Okay, though the game in India, though the game of chess began in India as Chaturanga, they were not called queen, king, and those things, bishop. The names, I can't remember them in local languages. They are very different. They are not knights and they are not rooks. They are not bishops. They are not all these people. King, queen. So, what you see is that there are rather two kinds of people. Knights who fought and demonstrated their bravery, demonstrated their loyalty to the king, and therefore earned the right to be a feudal lord. These are the knights. The people who were just born as feudal lords, they were the peers. Peers are equals. Why did they call themselves peers? That's the question, right? They called themselves peers because they said, we are all equal. We are equal. So that is what that meant. Now, please remember one thing. This is showing a bit of a fission, Fission, fission or tension in the feudal hierarchy. It is showing a bit of a fission or a tension in the feudal hierarchy because the knights are being looked down upon by the peers by calling themselves peers. The knight is not a peer, not my equal. You're not my equal. Okay? I am born with blue blood. I'm superior. That is what these people are claiming. So slowly this fission between the knights and the peers, it grew. The fission grew, and in 1341 CE, please remember the date. In 1341 CE, you find that the knights decide that they will not sit with the peers in the parliament. The knights decided these people are acting too high and mighty. They are thinking they are superior to us. Actually, we are superior because we have demonstrated our bravery, our courage. We have demonstrated all these things, and that is why we have become lords. And that is why we became knights. And these people who didn't do anything, who was just by fluke. You don't choose your parents, do you? It's fluke. You were born to a rich man. Like if you're born, if you're the son, the fat fellow who's now become thin, of Mukesh Ambani, did he choose Mukesh Ambani as his father and Neeta Ambani as his mother? He didn't. It's something that happened by fluke. So he's inherited all the wealth that Mukesh Ambani is making. He and his brother, they are inheriting it. So they said, these people are like that. Whereas we have demonstrated our ability. And because we have demonstrated our ability, we are superior. We are not inferior. We are superior. These people should not be calling us their unequals. So they decided that they will not sit in the parliament with the peers. So in 1341, the parliament became bicameral. You must have heard of this word. Those of you who came from maths background or from the BIPC background, bicameral means two chambers. In Latin, camerum is a chamber, okay, in which people sit. So the knights refused to sit with the peers. They said, we'll sit separately. That is how The Parliament of Britain became bicameral, or it has two houses. One house is the House of Lords, which is where the peers are sitting. The other house, now this is going to stump you, is the House of Commons, which is where the knights were sitting. House of feudal lords being called House of Lords is something which is understandable. But the knights, who are the equals of the lords, why were they sitting in a house called the House of Commons? Now, those students who did CEC in intermediate, you would have seen a chart. Bicameral legislature, suitable for big countries. Unicameral legislature, one house, unicameral, suitable to small countries. You would have seen the chart. You would have studied that chart. But the question is, how big is England? If you travel from one coast to the other, the island, if you travel in a train, it takes about 6 to 7 hours from this end to that end. Is that a big country? It's not a big country. Then how come it has two chambers? How is it bicameral? More importantly, how come one of the chambers is being called the House of Commons? Was there democracy in the 14th century? Were common people allowed to vote? No. Yet it is called the House of Commons. Why? That we'll pick up tomorrow. Okay, my throat is really gone. It's getting a lot of pain from talking. Anyway, I think our time is up also. Tomorrow, we'll look into this question of how did one of the houses of the parliament, or rather, why did one of the houses of the parliament get the name House of Commons when the common people had nothing to do with administration? no democracy, nothing. Despite that, it is the House of Commons. Why is it so? We'll do that tomorrow. Sorry about that glitch in Zoom. Zoom has some glitches. It sometimes troubles people. So I apologize for that. I apologize for you to have for you had to leave the meeting and come back. I apologize for that, but that was not in my hand. Zoom is a funny thing. See, computers are becoming more intelligent than human beings. They know how to play with us now. So,
Yep.
see you tomorrow in the evening. We'll try to understand how is it that at a time when there was no democracy, where the common people had nothing to do with administration, how come you had a House of Commons? We'll deal with that tomorrow. So thank you very much. I hope to see you tomorrow evening. And no, you don't have to thank me. I have to thank you for coming for these classes. But I made this paper. This paper is most of the papers in your course, I made them. And no. Thank you is not necessary. Thank you. So I thought if I don't teach this paper, they'll make pulp out of it. That is why I took on the responsibility. Thank you. I took on the responsibility of teaching this paper to you in the evening. And it is extremely heartening that you people are cooperating with me. Otherwise, what you would have learned would have nothing to do with what this paper was supposed to do. It would have had nothing to do with that. You've seen your teachers. I don't want to comment on that. You know how it is. So, even though I'm not a teacher in women's college. I don't have to teach BA. I'm the senior most professor in the Department of Political Science. Yet I wanted to teach BA. I always want to teach BA because that is where you can put a proper foundation. People are open-minded. By the time they come to PG, they are not open-minded. If I had my way, I would teach only BA. Teaching BA is nice. It's exciting because young minds wanting to learn is the thing there. So thank you. Very kind of you to agree to attend this. Otherwise, my fear was that this paper will become completely, it will be torn apart in various ways. It will have nothing to do with how it was conceived. It will have nothing to do with how it was conceived. So I hope You'll continue to come in the evenings. Thank you very much. See you tomorrow. In the evening, I'll see you in the morning in college at 10:30. Okay. Thank you. Have a nice meal and good night.